I live in a small rural community in the eastern United States. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. Small towns are just kind of weird like that. Everyone paints city folk as mean-spirited and only look out for themselves. And people in a small town will actively root for your downfall or bad shit to keep happening to you. City dwellers might just only be focused on themselves, but the people you find in a small town are the most toxic and unbelievable types you'll ever meet. I personally have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation itself is still ongoing, I have to be kind of vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. Thanks for being my anonymous diary, Booze and Booze. I'm single and live alone, due to a stalker. I moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for the story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as a motion sensor and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is actually just down the street from the fire station and only a couple of blocks away from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park the road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on the weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of the side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to mine, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard, unless they were actively looking for me. However, I can see the street pretty clearly. What I'm trying to lay out for you is that my house is in what I would consider a secure part of the town. The terrace that the property sits on prevents unwanted eyes from being able to prowl. So in my head, the proximity to all the local services like the fire department being right up the road, I would imagine not a lot of undesirables would traffic my road. It's too developed, too tight-knit, right? But boy, I was wrong. This incident occurred on Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel, with community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I did not attend. It's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog, and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing. Honestly, I really didn't even like fireworks when I was a kid. There's just something about congregating in the afternoon in the middle of July. It's hot, it's loud, all the food is being served out of the back of someone's truck. It's just not my scene. So I'm happy to stay in with my dog and just have a quiet night to myself. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight left, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup truck drove slowly down the street, I noticed it. It must have been turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, now moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time though, it turned into the parking lot of that road department. That was a relief, as county workers will sometimes come and go from that maintenance lot. The reasons vary, anything from checking the equipment or dropping something off for service, maybe even picking something up they forgot. It just isn't totally out of the norm to see someone come and go from this lot. It's literally a hub for the town to do business out of. Now, however, there is a flip side to this, because people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught. Because they don't want to or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of that truck. This is actually totally legal, but I'm a lone female, not particularly equipped to go out and confront a man that I don't know at all. The driver was somewhat of a stocky guy with average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck, then tossed them in one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. So it was the latter, just some local resident swinging by to get rid of some trash while the rest of the town was out watching the 4th of July show. Now, I swear to you, I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and their neighbors are up to no good. But something about this did not sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time I just had this gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog down to cut down on the distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to greet him, give him a description of the events, and point out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags into. Again, this was very out of character for me, so I just wanted it all to be done and over with as quickly as possible. If that guy was up to no good, we'd get to the bottom of it very quickly. If not, if it was really just a bag of harmless trash, well, that's okay too. Like I said, it was just a gut feeling on my part. He found the bags. He took a few photos, then put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because the gloves and how tight the knot actually was. Eventually, he gets it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. His face immediately told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was in that bag was not normal. Shit, he hissed under his breath. What? I asked. It's a body. I felt sick, and I could tell that he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hands was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. He ran the code again, and the radio went silent. Then the dispatcher came back with short, quick responses, just saying that more responders would be on site soon. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of that bag. The coroner then arrived around 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked with me back to the house, along with another one who'd arrived on the scene same time as the coroner. It was unreal to see everyone arriving on scene, all from just one little sighting, one little phone call to a non-emergency police line. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the event initially, I now showed them a video on a large screen in my house. It turned out I had the sole evidence for the case, short of the dead person dispersed between the trash bags. My footage and phone call was all they had to run on, and hopefully catch this weirdo. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate and or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested the footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week, just to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own cameras this week. But because this is all still fresh, I don't really have any more details. I know the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't even know if the coroner has been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance, just in case that guy comes back. The guy who dumped that body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? He probably thought it would get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulating over the holiday weekend. Then the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate it, which is honestly kind of smart. The 4th of July. Everyone's dumpsters are overflowing. Every trash can in the park and town is piled high with all kinds of crap. There really isn't a better time for the trash than the first week of summer. And the guy driving that white truck, I think he knew that. Makes me wonder if he's gotten rid of a body before this. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me physically ill. To think that he clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it might not have been his first time this has happened, or Maybe it could even happen again. If I hadn't called this in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I'd ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may have never even gotten potential justice, nor would their loved ones ever have closure. In fact, there's also a possibility it could happen again to another poor soul. I hope that's not me. Dear God, please don't let it be me. I think it's time I moved again. Third time's a charm, right? And just as a follow-up for any wondering, I did have to get temporary housing, because I live so close to the scene and made the actual report. The officers and me alike wanted me to be moved to a different and essentially secret location until the suspect or guy was found. To this day, it's been a couple of years now, and to my knowledge, he's never been found. Where I come from, the 4th of July is one for the books. We don't live in a big city, so the celebration itself gets pretty convoluted depending on where you live. There's one major fireworks show for the community, so everybody would go down to the park for an absolute blowout that goes all night long. But if you live in the right neighborhood, you'd get a view of the park firework display without even leaving your house. These neighborhoods would put together their own little block parties, where the families would come out to grill and light fireworks of their own. My family lived in one of these perfectly nested neighborhoods, so the 4th of July meant a party that did not stop. The summer air was alive with the smell of charcoal and hot dogs, the sound of children's laughter, the distant boom of fireworks. Our small Midwestern town came alive on July 4th, and our neighborhood block party was the epicenter of that celebration. I remember it like it was yesterday. The sun beating down on us as we ran around, our faces smeared with watermelon juice and our eyes shining with excitement. Every single year, our little block party would assemble to watch the firework display. But we also had our own stash of Roman candles, ladyfingers, and black cats to light up the evening. It was a time of innocence, and the only worry was getting a sparkler burn or accidentally setting the trash can on fire. But that particular year, something was off, at least for me. This is the year that I was a little older, maybe around 5th grade, starting to get an eye for people watching, and I had a knack for noticing behavior. A family had joined our celebration, one that I did not recognize. They stuck out like a sore thumb, with their strange clothing and funny expressions. They wore long sleeves and pants, even in the sweltering heat. Their accents were unfamiliar. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the fun and sun and games, but there was just something unsettling about it, something truly bizarre and weird. That was all it was, though. The rest of the family seemed to interact with them just fine. It had turned out they were in town visiting some relatives that lived on our street, a family that we all knew very well, so we just took them as they came. We were all having fun, including the children of the strange family, who were honestly just as weird. The kids didn't really speak a whole lot, wore clothes that I'd never seen before. As the evening wore on, adults began to get rowdy, laughing and shouting as they lit their own fireworks. The out-of-town family seemed to be the life of the party, but their behavior was starting to unnerve me. They were too loud, too boisterous, and their eyes seemed to gleam with a strange intensity. It wasn't until I grew up and got older that I would truly recognize the look in their eyes as the woefully mentally unstable. Again, as a 5th grader, I just tried to push it aside, focusing on the street poppers and sparklers, but that feeling couldn't shake it. All the adults were getting drunker by the minute, and the out-of-town family seemed to be leading the charge. I specifically remember a shiver running down my spine as I watched them, their laughter and shouts taking on this different tone. As the sun began to set, the firework display was about to begin. While the kids were getting restless, eager to light their own fireworks and join in on the celebration, that's when someone threw a black cat that exploded right next to my head. I was brought screaming back to the moment. Tonight was a night for the neighborhood, and some newcomers weren't going to throw me off and spoil the night. The firework display was in full swing. casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the night sky. The music was pulsating. Kids were laughing and playing, glow sticks waving like tiny batons. Again, I was lost in the magic of the moment, my eyes glued to the explosions above me. And that's when a commotion across the street now caught my attention. As you can imagine, it would have to be a serious commotion considering it pulled my attention away from the fireworks. The sound of voices, a couple of people hollering what sounded like a series of questions and then commands. It sounded like discipline, so my youngster ears was zoned in immediately. I walked across the street to Mrs. Jenkins' house, who had a shed on the side of her property that stored some small fireworks, sodas, and all manner of things. I wandered over to investigate. My curiosity piqued. A group of parents were clustered near the shed, their faces tense and worried. One of them, Mrs. Jenkins, was holding a child by the arm, her grip firm but gentle. The questions and commands I heard getting hollered were coming together in my head now. "The hell are you doing in there? Get out! Put the lighter down! Who let you in here?" "What's going on?" I asked, approaching the group. I was only 10 or 11 years old, but I was already piecing it together what really was going on. "This little one tried to sneak into the shed and light the fireworks himself," Mrs. Jenkins explained, her voice low and urgent. "Caught him just in time, thank God." Exactly what I suspected. The way the adults had been shouting, I knew something at least semi-serious must have gone down. The shed didn't really have anything too crazy in terms of fireworks, but the sheer volume alone would make the building go up in flames in about 2 seconds. If he'd lit a single wick, the block might have burned down. The child, one of the Strange family's kids, looked up at me with a mixture of fear and defiance right in his eyes. His parents were nowhere to be seen, but they soon appeared, their faces flushed and apologetic. They started brushing everything off, smoothing things over, and as they did that, their kid did not speak or even look up one single time. He became seriously menacing, staring off into the distance. As a kid, it really creeped me out. "Oh, we're so sorry," the mother said, her voice dripping with sincerity. "He just gets a little too excited sometimes. Make sure that we keep a closer eye on him." The other parents nodded, their faces understanding in the moment, but I could sense an underlying tension now. They were humoring the Strange family, but now their trust was gone. I guess it was the 4th of July, you know? No one really wanted to make a big deal out of it, so they just gave them the benefit of the doubt. Wants a bunch of drama at 8 p.m. on a holiday. Nobody, except the kid with the lighter, I guess, which they quickly confiscated. Made sure to put up all other lighters and matches, anything like that. "It's okay, accidents happen," Mr. Johnson said, his voice a little too loud. "Let's just focus back on having a good time again, shall we?" Everyone nodded, but the mood had definitely shifted. The music and fireworks seemed a little less joyful now, the laughter and shouts now tinged with a hint of unease. Those of us who had witnessed the little event knew we had just dodged something a little more serious. Even as a kid, I knew that, and I don't think I fully understood the gravity of the situation even then. I mean, hell, obviously that kid was unstable, right? Or had some kind of underlying problem. Lighting fire to explosives on a whim isn't normal or even rational in any way, at least to me. The night wore on, and I noticed the Strange family was getting more and more agitated. They seemed to be drinking, but not more than anyone else, I guess. But again, I'm a kid. Who knows? They were arguing amongst themselves, their voices hushed but definitely intense. When they weren't bickering, they were being so loud and boisterous, chanting and cheering. It just felt over the top. The kids were now getting restless, their eyes darting back and forth towards the shed where the fireworks were stored. The parents said they were going to keep a better eye on them, but we could all see that this was disingenuous. The family seemed to be back to full-time distracted, never really in the know or in control of whatever situation they were part of. Honestly, I just remember them getting weirder and weirder by the minute that night. "Hey, maybe we should keep a closer eye on them," I whispered to Mrs. Jenkins, nodding towards the Strange family. She followed my gaze and her expression was definitely worried. "I think you're right, but you kids stay close just in case." The night wore on, fireworks display finally coming to a close. But I knew the real show was just beginning. That strange family was building up to something, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to be pretty. Plus, we had a show of our own. After the finale, each block party would put on some real fireworks up in the air, stuff that you needed a little mortar for. This was honestly why the holiday was my favorite. Not many kids that I know would get a front row seat to amateur pyrotechnic crews lighting up in the driveway. As a 5th grader, I envisioned this might be what going to war might look like. Now, as you can imagine, this display caught the attention of the children of the strange family, and we were all too busy watching the show to notice them now. The guys were running back and forth, carefully lighting each brick of firework, which would then burn off on a timer and mostly shoot off themselves. The guys handling them only needed to make a small adjustment after they were lit. Well, the older boy, the one that tried to sneak into the shed, did the same thing. He snuck up on one of the unlit firework bricks, which had 25 cylinders inside of it, which means 25 aerial fireworks ready to fully explode. The kid stood off in the darkness, waited for somebody to come by and light it. And eventually, somebody did. They came over and lit it and then went back to handling the other bricks. Before that first firework could go off though, the kid walked up on it and tipped it over, so the firing cylinders were now facing the crowd. None of us noticed until the first explosions went off between all of us. I remember everyone screaming, the smell of burnt hair and singed clothing. It was so bright that it took away my vision for a few seconds, just leaving this dazzling display of afterburners. Fortunately, a few of the adults knew what was going on. They started corralling us kids between the homes, or at least inside if they could. But they were on an automatic wick timer. The fuse had been lit. There was no undoing it. Before we knew it, a second firework exploded, and a third, and soon, people were shrieking and spasming on the floor, both in the grass and the asphalt of the street. Someone pushed the kid away, got him subdued, while the other got the firework box upright so it was firing back into the air, not into our block party. Our 4th of July celebration was over at this point. We had the police, the fire department, and an ambulance all en route to our street. We could hear the individual sirens cutting through the town. They start rolling in, families giving their own statements, some even needing medical treatment. A great many simply just went home, anxious to clean up the next morning and see what damage had been caused. That strange family lingered out on the street as people secretly pointed their fingers at them. Said it was an accident, but it was their kid. Except that wasn't an accident, and I only seemed to be the one aware of it. Me and maybe Mrs. Jenkins. I asked her what she thought, but she didn't see anything when it happened. Hard to put the blame on the kid when you actually didn't see him do it. Still, it was pretty obvious that he'd done it, and others outright claimed they watched him do it. Ultimately, nobody got hauled off or anything, no charges or arrest, but that family left the next morning and thankfully we never saw them again. Our neighbor claimed it was her sister and her family. They'd always been a little off, lived somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. The neighbor apologized profusely, but I think we were lucky. There were a few others that did have serious burn injuries though. One guy had the hole of the size of a baseball burned through both sides of his t-shirt, like a firework had passed through it. No missing toes or fingers, but I think all in all, 6 kids went to the hospital and 2 or 3 adults. It was definitely the scariest thing to ever happen to me, and I'm a little more careful now on my July 4th festivities. Years ago, I attended a college that was a couple of towns over from the one that I grew up in. This made the commute really easy, as every summer and holiday break would come, I could just drive the distance back home. No flights, no big crazy moves, just an afternoon drive. I have a story about one such summer, wherein I just returned from school, and some crazy shit happened to me and my friends on the night of July 4th. It was quite the story when I got back to college. The summer sun beat down on our crappy little town, casting a warm bubble over the familiar streets and homes. I'd returned from college, eager to reunite with old friends and make some new memories. The group of us had been inseparable since high school. It seemed like no time had even passed at all, as we fell back into our old rhythms. I didn't have anywhere fancy I stayed when I came back, just crashed with mom and dad in exchange for all the normal household chores. Walking the dog, mowing the lawn, cleaning out the gutters, all that normal stuff that comes with the summer months. I didn't really mind it though, as it was nice to have these little bouts of relaxation and familiarity in between the crushing anxiety-inducing semesters of college. Anya, my former girlfriend, was amongst the first to greet me, her bright smile and sparkling eyes making my heart immediately skip a beat. We spent hours catching up, laughing, reminiscing about old times. The rest of my gang was just as welcoming, and soon we were all hanging out, vibing just like we used to. Anya and I didn't have a messy split or anything, we just had different paths in life, and wanted to stay friendly. She'd gotten into a much better school than I did and had plans to leave the state after school anyway, so a future just didn't seem really that possible. Either way, we were holding hands and giving fast secret kisses right there on that day. And then it was July, the big holiday weekend, and all of us were in town. We couldn't be more excited, as our community just shuts down for the whole thing. You know the drill: cookouts, concerts, food trucks. People come from other towns just to go off inside our city limits. We have one of the best firework displays in my opinion, and the cops don't do a lot of policing, if you know what I mean. As the weekend approached, plans were made to head out to Tucker's house, a sprawling farm property just outside of city limits. This was absolutely the ideal place, and the same spot we've been using for years, decades, for as long as anyone could remember. Lots and lots of good memories have been made out there on that farm, and this weekend would be no different. Tucker's family was away in Mexico, leaving us complete free reign over the place. The highlight of the evening would be the firework display, and we all knew the best spot to watch it, and that was in the tall grassy hill on the edge of Tucker's property. When I say tall, I'm talking like 100 feet up, maybe even more. You can see the entire township, the whole valley extending off into nothing. Not only could we see our fireworks show, but we could potentially see some of the shows from the next town over too, because the terrain is that flat out there. We got out there and spent the afternoon drinking, smoking, and blasting party music, the excitement building as the sun began to set. Anya and I found ourselves deep in conversation. That connection was still strong despite the time apart. As the others started to get ready and head out to the hill, we reluctantly joined the group, eager to keep our night going. "All right, guys, let's move out," Tucker shouted, his grin infectious as we all filed out of the house and into the yard. The hill was just across the property, maybe a quarter mile from the house itself. A perfect little jaunt through the warm evening air, listening to the buzz of conversation, pop tops of beer cans, and steady trail of joint and cigarette smokes trailing right behind us. The nearest property was maybe 10 miles away, so we were lords of the manor for all intents and purposes. The air was now thick with anticipation as we made our way up the hill, the sound of crickets and rustling grass quickly filling the air. We settled in, passed around some beers and snacks. The sky above us was a deep shade of indigo. This was it, the annual Crackpot Fireworks Show. 45 minutes of dazzling lights and explosions, all while we continued to get drunk and feel each other up in the dark. "This is so fun," Anya sighed, snuggling up close to me as we gazed out at the view. I nodded, feeling a sense of contentment wash right over me. This is what summer was all about: good friends, good times, and the freedom to enjoy it all. The stress of school was far away out of my mind as we sat there in the grass and stared up at the stars as they slowly appeared. But as we waited for the fireworks to begin, a faint sense of unease started to creep in my mind. It was as if something was watching us from the shadows, waiting for its perfect moment to strike. I pushed that thought aside, focusing on the laughter and chatter around me. Little did I know the night was only beginning, and the real fireworks were yet to come. We passed beers and joints around, enjoying the firework display right above us. But as the night grew on, we quickly noticed a second group of individuals, off in the dark, also using the hill as a lookout point. They were all pretty good ways away, but we could see them clearly under the flashing lights of the fireworks. "Hey, what's up with those guys?" Anya asked, nodding towards the other group of people. Tucker squinted, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know, but they're not hurting anyone. Let's just leave them alone." I mean, the hill on the farm was pretty huge. Like I said, something a lot of the locals would know about. It definitely wasn't the first time someone had helped themselves up to the frontage side from that country road and would quietly spectate. It's not a big deal, not anything his family would be up in arms about. I'd personally been here at least half a dozen times where there was at least one other group sitting off in the dark, complete strangers that would vanish by the end of the show. We continued watching the fireworks, but now our attention would occasionally drift back to that other group. They were getting rowdy, shouting and laughing. It sounded more like a brawl than a party. It was subtle at first, just loud voices, but soon it sounded like an argument, a screaming match, and it was getting heated quickly. I pulled Anya into my arms and watched over her head for any sign of trouble. Then suddenly a fight broke out, and we could see people punching and kicking each other under the flashing lights. It looked intense, and it looked like they were seriously hurting one another. It looked like 2-on-2, with each guy duking it out with a single other guy. It wasn't friendly at all, balled fists just cold cocking one another. Sporadic light overhead illuminating a different amount of blood each time. Eyes, nose, mouth, everything was leaking something. "Oh my God, we gotta do something," Anya explained, her voice now trembling. Tucker hesitated but then nodded. "Yeah, I should probably call 911. We quickly pulled out a cell phone and dialed, our hearts racing as we waited for somebody to answer. Tucker went from 0 to 100 real quick. It was either all in or nothing with him. I saw that he was willing to give the benefit of the doubt, but letting him hang out in peace. But now, they'd broken out in a scuffle. I mean, shit, this was Tucker's property after all. Someone got hurt or murdered, it would come back on them if someone decided to sue or anything like that. I don't know, just college thinking in the moment. So Tucker decided to call the police and just get the whole thing over with. 911, what's your emergency? A dispatcher's voice came through. Hello, we're all at the Watley farm just outside of town, and there's an assault taking place amongst strangers unknown to us, Tucker explained, trying to remain calm. The dispatcher's voice was firm. Clear the immediate area and wait for the police. They're on their way. We didn't want to vacate per se. We still had half a fireworks show to see and beer to drink. We settled back in the dark, trying to enjoy the fireworks, but that commotion from the other group was too gruesome and extremely distracting. We could hear the sound of punches being thrown and people whimpering in pain. The whole thing was messed up, but I was in protection mode, not go investigate a bunch of violent folks in the dark mode. Suddenly, Tucker saw headlights off in the distance, and we sprinted straight down the hill, across the property to lead the police to the scene faster. We all watched as this little dark body tracked across the field and intercepted two cruisers, waved them down within like 2 minutes. I was blown away by how good of shape Tucker was in. We watched the cops park their cars and then get out, and followed Tucker as a fast walk across the pasture. They all came panting up to the hillside not 5 minutes later. The cops went over and lit the place up. That other group freaked out, scattered in all directions. Some of them went barreling down the hill backwards toward town. Others went running off into the thicket of trees into the other direction. The 3 responding officers went charging after them, and after 30 minutes of chasing and wrestling around, appeared to have them all apprehended. 6 people all in all, 5 girls and a guy. They were all beyond drunk, probably on drugs too. The police hauled them off to their cruisers and then wished us a good night. Tucker had to give a brief statement, but it was a pretty cut and dry case of trespassing, they said. They would follow up if they needed any more from him or his folks. As we watched them drive away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash right over us. It was over. We could finally now enjoy the firework finale in peace for ourselves. But as we settled in, that feeling of something being off returned to me. The darkness now pressed in around us. The fireworks seemed to explode with this newfound intensity. "Hey guys, do you mind if we get out of here?" Anya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling a sense of dread creeping up my spine. We quickly gathered up all our things and made our way back down the hill, fireworks still exploding right above us. As we reached the bottom, we heard a strange noise, kind of like a low humming. It was faint, but sent a shiver down my spine. "What is that?" Anya asked, her eyes scanning out in the darkness. I shook my head. "I don't know, but let's just get out of here." We then quickly made our way back to the house, that humming growing louder and louder with each step. It was like something was following us, watching us. I don't really know how else to explain it. It was weird. None of us were really upset about missing the fireworks now, as the whole thing was just crazy. We're glad to not have been assaulted or arrested or anything of the sort. The fighting and the cops showing up really just threw off the vibe, especially since we were all stoned and pot was nowhere near legal yet. As we walked back, I couldn't help but wonder what we had just witnessed. I threw my arm around Anya and did my best to forget about it. Turned to Tucker and nodded my head. "Got any beers left?" "Nope," came his response. "All right, well, how about a joint?" I followed up. "Dude, I always got one of those," he said, literally pulling one out from underneath his hat. It was a classic pothead, always had a twist to the good stuff. We fired it up and passed it back and forth while walking back to the house. Anya relaxed underneath my arm, and from the smoke of the doobie, we were all soon chilling on the porch, playing beer pong and just watching the stars twinkle overhead. Off in the distance, we could hear rogue fireworks exploding, citizens doing their own duty to keep the spirit alive throughout the night. "What you think about those assholes out on the hill?" I asked Tucker. "I don't know, man. Probably just some hillbillies from town. Someone who not only knows the hill is there, but has the balls to go beyond that no trespassing sign that we have up," he explained, tossing the ping pong ball. He and I were locked in a game of beer pong. He was slowly starting to whoop my ass. He sank the next one right there in front of me. I nodded. It did kind of make sense. They didn't seem concerned at all with having people around, all while they kicked the shit out of one another. So some trailer park royalty didn't seem too far-fetched in the moment. We kept playing drinking games, talking shit and doing shots, till about 11 p.m. We all started to scoot inside around that point, moving the speakers and everything else into the living room. People were talking about heading home soon, but honestly, everyone was pretty hammered. We kept the door to the patio open as we continued to bring stuff in and enjoy the cool night air. There's a lot of commotion, a lot of bodies moving, so we really didn't notice the guy at first when he came out of the dark. He sauntered between us and kind of did what we were doing, putting beer cans in the trash, picking up garbage, folding the chairs, random cleanup stuff like that. Next thing we know, this guy steps inside the house with us. Keep in mind, we're all incredibly drunk at this point. Anya took one look and gasped. "Who is that guy?" she said with disgust. "It was rude as hell at first, but you'll see why it was warranted." "Oh shit, hey man, where'd you come from?" Tucker offered. The guy just nodded his head over his shoulder and toward the door. "Huh?" Tucker said, shaking his head. "You lost? How'd you get in here? Do I even know you?" He was being a good host, almost feigning to know this guy from somewhere. "Nah, I was watching the fireworks, saw you guys. Thought you might need some help," he explained. "Oh, all right. Do you live around here?" Tucker asked him. "Back in town," he said. Okay, and how did you get out of here again? Tucker responded. I was out on the hill with my friends earlier when you guys called the fucking cops. He explained in this slow, dramatic voice. I watched his eyes literally dilate as he explained it to us, then picked up a beer bottle and smashed out the glass of the back door. Oh shit, dude, I remember screaming in total shock, more concerned that the guy had severely cut his hand open more than anything else. But before I could do anything else myself, that guy was lunging at me with his bloody hand and shattered bottle. In my drunken stupor, I barely reacted. I just kind of fell backwards and pushed his hands away. I could immediately smell the whiskey on him, stuff that we hadn't been drinking. He was clearly hammered, had avoided the police somehow, and was now getting his revenge for fucking up that 4th of July celebration for himself. Tucker came back from behind with Sean, our other buddy. They quickly tried to wrap this guy up, and it didn't really work. This guy was kind of big and ropey, and he ended up cutting Sean's arms pretty badly. The three of us tried to corner him, push him back outside, while the rest of the group scrambled for phones and kitchen knives. I'm fucking warning you, man, Tucker said. This is not gonna go the way you think it is. I myself was nowhere near as confident, but I did have his back, and we had him severely outnumbered. Our other friend Franco appeared at my side with an 8-inch chef knife, glistening under the light bulbs. I was now starting to feel a little better about the situation. The guy then took a bottle and threw it at Tucker as hard as he could. Tucker covered up, but it hit him in the chest pretty good, opened up a wound immediately. As we all focused on our friend, the guy snatched up 2 more bottles and started swinging them. But at this point, we were furious. Me, Sean, and Tucker started kicking at this guy, hard as shit, hitting him square in the hips and thighs. Very much like that Spartan kick from 300, just lower. Franco brandished the knife and the guy realized he was indeed outgunned. Behind us though, the girls had called the police, who were quickly coming back out to the location. All we had to do was keep the guy occupied for another minute or two. It turned out to be a little easier than I expected. The guy eventually backed out of the house, across the patio and down the stairs, hurling insults, talking about how he ruined his plans. We talked back just to keep him on the hook, and eventually those familiar headlights came cutting back down the driveway. Hey look, buddy, your friends are here, Tucker said, pointing and laughing. A reunion for the ages. The guy turned to get a look at the police car. Oh, god damn it, he muttered. The guy was sloshed, coming off God knows how many other drugs, and now reality was crashing down around him. Cops pulled up and the guy didn't resist at all, just cuffed and jammed into the back seat. We gave a much more detailed report this time, and the EMTs were called out for Tucker and Sean's wounds, both of which needed stitches. Turns out jagged glass is absolutely no joke. That was the last truly exciting 4th of July weekend that I can remember. And for obvious reasons, they've all been pretty dull ever since then.